the strongest, so to see the slides, it's better down here. I am going to introduce Veronica in a moment. I'm Professor Leah Libra from Information Studies. You heard about me and the whole conference team this morning from Kim Gomez. But what I want to do right now is, as soon as everybody's seated and ready, we've invited our Dean, the Wasserman Dean of the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies, Marcelo Suarez Orozco, is with us today to just bless the event, I think, right? Which is a good thing, and you've got a straight line, as I understand, right, to certain powers that be. So he's a good guy for blessing. So here's our Dean. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm so happy. I'm so delighted to be able to join you for this, our 5th annual Research and Inquiry Conference. This is, I think, a wonderful opportunity that brings together, and our speaker this afternoon will surely understand what I mean, the two moitiés. This is how the French anthropologist once talked about social structure and social organization. The two moitiés that constitute this are Graduate School of Education and Information Studies. Furthermore, in addition to bringing the two, I think you mentioned the Holy Father, so this may be our call. So in addition to bringing together the two sides of the family, I think it's an extraordinary display of the relational engagement and the mentorships that our faculty and our students develop around basic theoretical, conceptual, practice issues in their specific domains of work. So as I was walking here, reflecting on the title of our gathering, Reclaiming Expertise, Facing the Challenges to Knowledge, Authenticity, Expertise, and Trust. And I think this is so timely. This is so urgent. I think it's fair to say that we can no longer take the tenets for granted of the democratic ideal, the democratic promise any longer, certainly in a country like the United States, in the current context. And I think that interrogating that statement really brings us to the issue of the nexus between education, information, and very broadly speaking, citizenship, the topic of our keynote today. I like these days of malaise and anomie and dystopia. I'd like to go back to a quote from a century ago, when H.G. Wells, I think prophetically, noted, quote, "Civilization is now in a race between education and catastrophe. Let us learn the truth," I'm quoting, "and spread it as far and wide as our circumstances allow. For the truth is the greatest weapon we have." End of quote. I think here I reflect on the idea of the truth not as a vulgar, reductionistic, simplistic claim that flows from a misunderstanding of science, of epistemology, of the humanistic ideals that inform our scholarship and our work. But the contested truths that are so central to the scholarly project, to the scholarly endeavor that we are all engaged in. In the age of fake news and fake politicians and fake data, it is fundamental to stake a claim for the values of expertise, of knowledge, of trust, as fundamental beacons from which the promise and the practice of democracy flows. I'm happy that we are gathering here. The topics of the panels, of the student presentations are very diverse. They flow from the variety of scholarly and practice traditions that inform our work. And the big tent, epistemologically speaking, that is the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies. I'm grateful to the team, I'm grateful to Professor Liberov, I'm grateful to Professor Gomez for taking the lead. I'm grateful for the team that is behind all the efforts that result in our conversations today. So, welcome, bienvenidos, as we say in the old country. So happy to now turn the podium back to Leah, who will introduce our distinguished speaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marcella. And thank you for those comments about the theme. Our team worked on that a lot in the fall, given the sort of situation that we all find ourselves in these days. It seemed particularly apt to try and form something around those ideas of contestation and expertise, and now what is our role? If knowledge is what we are about, and training people is what we are about, and the ability to give people some expertise that they can take into the world, what does it mean when the culture doesn't want experts anymore? Okay. So that's just kind of our animating. In Britain, of course, you know, nobody wants experts. Okay, the Brexit issue. So I will be brief here. We are starting a little bit after time, but I'm hoping that we can kind of nudge into the afternoon session a little bit to take most of an hour for Veronica's talk and some question and answer at the end. You all, if you have a program, you'll see kind of her brief bio, Veronica Barassi. She and I have been colleagues for some years now. It's kind of funny because a common colleague of ours, Sonia Livingstone, who is at the London School of Economics, and I've been working with Sonia for 20 years, and Sonia thought she was introducing us one time. Oh, Leah, here's this person you need to know. And I said, we're on Skype all the time already. Okay. So we found each other already around our common work on activism and online activism and social movements. I've got a prop. Here's my prop. This is the UCLA Library copy of Activism on the Web, Everyday Struggles Against Digital Capitalism, Veronica's book from 2015. So get it if you don't have it. Veronica does some of the best work on social movements and online activism. There it is. Veronica has a PhD in anthropology from Goldsmiths University of London, and you're just an alum all the way down with, with Goldsmith. She still works with Goldsmiths in media and communication department. And if you know anything about media studies, cultural studies, critical studies, you'll recognize some of the names of, as well as Veronica, some of her colleagues, including Sean Cubitt, Jim Curran, Natalie Fenton, the wonderful Natalie Fenton, Marianne Franklin, Angela McRobbie, David Morley. That's just the beginning of the list of people that she works with. She is also, as it says in the bio, she is the head and founder of the Media Ethnography Group there in Media and Communications at Goldsmiths. And prior to the work that she is going to talk about today, she also led a project on social movements and media technologies, which basically had a whole series of seminars that we put together. And I was very proud last year to be the keynote for the last of those seminars in that series. So this is payback, you know, is what we're doing. I'm very lucky that Veronica is in town on short leave from Goldsmiths right now and was able to join us. So I'm going to leave it there. See the movie. Bye. I'm not sure what happened there. Dustin, it's going right now.
Just try pressing the computer.
I'm doing that. I'll start. I'll start talking. We're gonna put it up. Okay, hi. So thank you for the introduction and thank you for inviting me. I'm really honored and delighted to be here. Okay, good. Good. So today we've been talking about knowledge and we've been talking about expertise. And we've been questioning what happens when our knowledge, our expertise are challenged, when they're questioned, or when they're belittled. What are we to do as educators, as information experts, and as researchers? I personally, this is just a short introduction to what I think I believe, and I'm going to get into the talk, but I personally believe that the contemporary challenge to knowledge needs to be found in two changes that have taken place over the last 10 years. On the one hand, following the 2008 financial crisis, we have seen, we've seen the emergence of a public distrust in institutions. And this public distrust in institution was the direct repercussion of the crisis, which was social and political repercussions, and economic, of course, but also political and emotional. So you have middle classes and working classes who are angry and frustrated, and they want to challenge the status quo. And so they tend to favor those parties who claim to be challenging the status quo, those parties that actually work on emotions rather than facts, and that have an agenda of deconstructing expertise. And we've seen this in Europe a lot. I'm Italian, that's my accent, and I've been in the UK for 16 years at the moment. So this is something that I actually lived firsthand in the last couple of years. But then we've seen another change that again took place over the last 10 years, and that's the change that I want to talk to you about today. This is the way in which I define it is a changing, society's changing attitude towards data. So what do I mean by society's changing attitude towards data? So many people talk about it as a data revolution. Some other people, I don't know what's going on. Oh, sorry, still here. Slideshow. Yeah. Some people talk about it as a data revolution. Some others refer to it as datafication. And that's what I like to talk about. I like to talk about datafication because I believe that what's happening is a really complex cultural and social transformation, which is encompassing different dimensions of social life, which include, of course, technological developments. So we're seeing the
developments such as the developments of these supercomputers that are able to integrate larger and larger and larger data sets. We're seeing developments in artificial intelligence technologies or facial recognition technologies and many other types of technologies that are surrounding us. But we're also seeing a transformation in cultural narratives, in what we believe is knowledge. And as Boyd and Crawford have argued, there is a tendency to believe that algorithmic logics and larger data sets offer us a greater type of knowledge. A knowledge that matters, that is more accurate, that actually can enable us to trace patterns and to understand what's happening out there. And again, like any transformation, when we have a technological transformation, we have a transformation in what people believe, and we have a transformation in what people do. So we have a transformation in the practices. So you're seeing a lot of organizations, from governments to health providers to educational institutions, who are buying into this idea that data matters. And it doesn't only matter because it makes money, it matters because we believe that it creates a new type of knowledge, right? And so what we are experiencing is a datafication of everything, as Kucher and Meyer-Schorberg discussed. Whereby all different aspects of human experience are being transformed into data. And today I'm here to talk about this. I'm here to talk about what's happening to childhood. And what I want to do is to question the fact that at the moment what we're doing is that we're producing larger and larger data sets of very private, very intimate, and very sensitive information about individuals' lives. And these data sets define us. And what I want to try to do with you is to try to question what type of knowledge we're producing. How accurate is this knowledge? And I'm going to do this departing from my own background. So I'm, again, as Leah said, I'm an anthropologist. I got my PhD in anthropology, and however, because I've always been working on communication technologies, I've always been working and writing across different disciplines. But despite during the last 10 years I've been working at the intersection of many different disciplines, I'm passionate and committed to anthropological knowledge and the way in which anthropological knowledge is produced. And now, anthropologists are committed to the ethnographic method, okay? So all of you are going to say, well, there's so many of us who are committed to the ethnographic method, and we use it, and many different disciplines do, and actually sociology has had it for many, many years. But the way in which I see it is that anthropologists use the ethnographic method in a different way. In the sense that we use, as Sarah Pink has argued, for us ethnography is not really a research method. It's more of a research perspective. So that is aimed at opening the field of research ahead of us. And as Tim Ingold has argued, when we think about ethnography and anthropology, we need to be thinking about design. So, and designing is always about imagining the future, which means that far from seeking finality and closure, we like to imagine what's open-ended and what's out there. We approach the field with questions in mind that are open-ended. And anthropologists are committed to this open-endedness and seek this open-endedness by basically through two practices. The first one is the thick description, the idea that actually you need to look at many different dimensions of human experience and capture that dimensions of human experience, because maybe there's something that we are missing. And also we look for, we like to study things from different contexts, and we believe that people experience things in many different ways, depending on the culture and the context they come from. So we like to be surprised, we like to be challenged, we like to look for contradictions and disconnection and unpredictabilities. And as Stratearn has argued about digital technologies, when she wrote the foreclosure of a book which was titled Virtual Society, this seeking the uncertainties and the unpredictabilities is central if we want to understand the impact of technologies in our everyday life, because we don't know what they are here to do. and we don't know how people are relating to technologies. And so anthropologists are, like Trevor has argued, we are looking for the human possibilities, and because we believe that human possibilities are always generally greater than what we generally imagine. So this idea that we are out there to seek what's the details of everyday life, okay? So one thing that I admire about anthropological knowledge, and I'm done with anthropological knowledge, so you can be happy about that. One thing that I admire about anthropological knowledge is that we start from the experience. And I want to start today with the experience of 3 people that I met during my fieldwork. And then I want to start talking about the theory, because it is from the experience of people like Anna, Jay, and Liz, which are fictional names to protect their anonymity, but it's from their experience that I started to come to terms with the way in which I see it and the theoretical understandings that I give to my findings. And I took their experiences because all their experiences have something to say about the education sector. I know some of you might be interested in that. So one day I was sitting with Anna, and I had known Anna for over a year, and we were having a dinner, and I have 2 girls, and she has 2 boys, and she had been on a waiting list for a preschool for her eldest for quite some time, and it was a good preschool. It's really good preschool, really close to her house. She was very excited, and because she knew that I was interested in this, she took out her phone and she shows me the app. And she says, look, my school is communicating through this fantastic app. Everything is here. I can upload the information about my child's allergies. I can look at the performance. I can upload and download images and so on. And I look at her and I say, is the app outsourced? And she looks at me, she's like, of course. And I was like, okay, and did you check the terms and conditions? And she's like, of course not. And I was like, of course I haven't, but also, what choice would I have? Fast forward a couple of months later, I'm sitting with Jay, and Jay is the grandfather of 2 girls here in Los Angeles. He's an entrepreneur, extraordinarily fascinating man, and he's, and he sits on the board of trustees of the school of his granddaughters. And we're talking about the softwares and apps that they use in the school and how the data of the children is used. And he says to me, we have very little choice as a school. We are a private school, but we work on unlimited funding. So for us, what matters is actually to find a technology that is a good technology, has a good pedagogic value, and that also is affordable. So we have very little choice. I said, okay. Then a little bit after that, I was in London, and I was in the living room of Liz. And Liz was she was very particular in the people that I work with, because her and her husband were very, very, very concerned with their children's digital privacy. But they were having an enormous problem at school, and the issue of contention was the school play. So Liz and her husband were the ones that actually had refused to sign the permission to allow the members of the audience to take photos at the school play. And so the parents' committee were furious, because they were saying, well, actually, I understand that you have your freedom to protect your children's data, but you're actually impacting on our freedom to take pictures of our children. So why am I talking about the experience of Anna, Jay, and Liz? Well, I'm talking about the experience of Anna, Jay, and Liz because something is changing, and it's profoundly transforming the lived experience of education. And this something has a lot to do with the way in which children's data traces are produced and are shared. But how are we to understand this transformation? And how are we to appreciate the tension, the fears, and the insecurities that are arising as the education sector becomes much more datafied? So, with the Child Data Citizen project, my aim is to engage with these questions and to show that actually we can't really understand what's happening in the education sector without looking at how the experience of childhood is becoming datafied. We have to take a broader look at it, right? And the project is funded by the British Academy, and explores the everyday identification of children by focusing on families who live in London and Los Angeles and who have children between 0 and 13 years of age, so that their personal information is ruled by the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, right? And the research relies on a multi-method approach. There is a lot of autoethnography, a lot of digital ethnography, a lot of participant observation in the field. I'm collecting 50 in-depth semi-structured interviews, but I'm also working on the communication infrastructures. So I'm actually analyzing the data policies and the platform, how I call it, the techno-social environment of the platforms that parents use. And so it's a kind of much more of information studies type of approach, right? So, and I'm analyzing early infancy apps, home hubs, and artificial intelligence toys. Okay? So the project so far has revealed that on an average family day, data is everywhere. And as you can see, that is a very kind of scary map, if you want. And actually, to not exploit someone's photo, I decided to put myself as I was a child. And I've been told yesterday, it looks very old, that photo. I don't care. So today, on an average day, basically, what we have in terms of technologies that collect data of children, we have facial recognition technologies. And facial recognition technologies are on common used technologies such as Google Photos or iPhotos or social media like Deepface. And they have, Deepface has almost 98% of accuracy, so they can detect a face as just almost as much, almost as well as a human, right? So, and then you have voice recognition technologies. And voice recognition technologies are like home hubs, but also all the artificial intelligence devices that we are incorporating into our homes, especially artificial intelligence toys. And when we talk about voice recognition, we're not only talking about voice recognition. Voice recognition at the moment is a bit less scary than facial recognition, because facial recognition, you have to understand it in conjunction to facial progression technologies. So there's been a lot of advances in facial progression technologies, and so it's going to be easy to identify children. Adults from their children's photos. Voice recognition is a bit less worrying in that regard, but it's more worrying because these hubs collect extraordinarily contextualized and extraordinarily sensitive data. And to give you an example, when Hello Barbie was launched, and Hello Barbie is an artificial intelligence toy, when Hello Barbie was launched in 2015, the developers made it clear that Hello Barbie had to know everything. So if the child's grandmother had died the week before, Hello Barbie had to know it. If the child was a child of two mothers, Hello Barbie had to know it, because they didn't want to incur a situation where the child was upset by his or her interaction with the toy. So you're talking about really sensitive information that is going out there, and that's stored on their clouds. Then you get educational data. Educational data is massive at the moment, not only because, as you all know, schools are embracing outsourced softwares and apps, but also because in our homes we use apps that are learning apps and so on. Again, if you think about health records, we go to doctors, we sign off the terms and conditions, we often log in online softwares or online platforms and to get our results. We use health tracking apps, and again, this is all data that children's data is going into, it's in there. Then we have social media posts, and in the last couple of years there's a lot of research emerging on sharenting. I know it's a bit of a stretch to charity, but they call it sharing because it's parenting that overshare information. There is almost this kind of moral panic about it. But there is a lot of research in the field of social media posts, but that's just the tip of the iceberg of what's happening, like we're talking about data flows that are really all-encompassing. Then we have, obviously, families' browsing history, we have locations, and we have entertainment devices. All this collect data on an average day, and they collect data that is personal and that is data of minors in the majority of cases. Now, in an article In an article, Lupton and Williamson attempt to map some of these multiple technologies that collect, share, and process the personal information of children. And they argue that we are seeing the emergence of the datafied child, big word, where children become data assemblages, they become calculable persons or quantified selves, whatever you. And they draw on the literature, the sociological literature of surveillance. Many of you might be from, maybe not, but maybe there's a big sociological literature at the moment that works on digital surveillance and total surveillance and has this kind of bit of almost techno-dystopian understanding of what's happening, like Big Brother is watching you. And then they combine that literature with a quite fascinating literature on the quantification of the self, right? So how people are using technologies to understand what's happening to their bodies or to their selves and so on. And their approach is fascinating. However, my own ethnographic research on the identification of childhood reveals that whilst it is tempting to refer to concepts such as datafied child or quantified self when we look at the technologies, we also need to understand that the identification of children is not linear, is not cohesive, or even a rational process that is transforming us in quantified self. It is a rather complex, extraordinarily messy process which is defined by an incredible and almost untraceable plurality of digital technologies and human practices. So during the research, it became evident that families most of the times did not use the technologies as they were supposed to do. And many times they used it in tactical ways to protect their children's privacy. So there is an extraordinary messiness that defines digital routines in family life. Not only different family members, guests and friends use the same devices, and so when we are being profiled on the basis of our web histories, we don't really know who the person that did that web search was. But also, they use this technology in extraordinarily inaccurate ways, which if we try to make sense of these uses without having a context, we really, we are at loss. You know? So to give you an example, which is part of my I've been working a lot on autoethnographic stuff in the sense that I've been taking journal of my own pregnancy and my own child parenting. I have 2 girls. So, and I just had 1. So when I was pregnant with my second girl, Google knew that I was pregnant before my family, and Google knew that I was pregnant before my family. But then I think after 6 months that I was pregnant, my sister announced that she was pregnant. And me and my sister are very close. And so I started Googling about her stage of pregnancy, right? Yeah, I just went through it, but so my algorithm completely lost its course. Because on Facebook, they didn't know yet who I was and what I was doing. Did I have a newborn baby or was I still pregnant? And so on. And it keeps on happening. Because I keep on Google and search things that are for my sister, but obviously I'm being profiled as if it was my own, right? And I have a million of examples of these situations. So in contrast to political economic approaches that talk about total surveillance and sociological ones that assume an almost objectified quantification of the self, anthropology and ethnographic approaches are there to remind us that there is an intrinsic messiness and contradictions in human interactions, right? So what can we do as ethnographers? Why is it important to do an ethnography of data? Well, the ethnography of data enables us to also to reveal what it feels like. How does it feel to engage in this process of datafication? And how are families understanding and experiencing the constant targeting and the constant data mining? My research revealed that parents often find themselves feeling a mixture of uneasiness and anxiety, which is also coupled with a feeling of powerlessness and a sense of inevitability. When they talk about the datafication of children, they're just saying, you know, like Anna, there's nothing, I don't have a choice. You know, she had been on the waiting list for I don't know how many months, and then she finally got into the school, and if the school used an app that was not, had a kind of dodgy terms and conditions, she was not going to say, no, I'm not going to go to this school, or I'm just going to be completely out of all the communications. Because as the example of Liz has shown, it takes courage to go against these processes, takes time, and it always creates very unpleasant situations amongst one's own relationships. So in the last couple of years, I've been writing a lot about the coercion of digital participation. The fact that at the moment we live in such complex techno-social environments that are constructed around our own relationships, and we can't escape them. We don't have a choice. We don't really have a choice. Like imagine if a mother has a son and his son is playing soccer with a soccer team, and they build, and the mothers of that soccer team, they communicate only through a Facebook group. Imagine if she didn't have Facebook. I mean, she could, but what price would she pay at a social level, right? So it's this idea that there is a constant coercion of digital participation because we are in these techno-social worlds that are so interconnected with our own human relationships, right? But also there is, when we talk about coercion of digital participation, we also need to understand that this coercion is happening also because of specific communication infrastructures. So before I started my Child Data Citizen project, and I was awaiting for ethical clearance, which at Goldsmith is a really long process. I mean, I suppose here as well, but you kind of, you submit an ethical form, you have to wait to go to the field. And because I was on my desk, I was like, what can I do? What can I do? I want to start researching. So I decided that I was going to do a desk-based research of pregnancy and early infancy apps. And I realized, and I started reading data policies, and it was kind of proper non-anthropological work. It was like a technological type of, where I studied political economy of the apps, I studied the data policies, and so on. And I studied the reviewers' comments. And what I came out, the findings, and I published an article which is called Baby Valence on Social Media and Society last year. The result was that if you look at the data policies, they are extraordinarily ambiguous. They're really ambiguous. Even if you put a lot of effort in reading them, it's so difficult to understand what happens to the data, first of all. The second thing is that the opting out mechanism is really difficult to follow. So for one app, for instance, I tried to opt out from the app, and then I landed on an Adobe page, and then the Adobe page was just telling me that, well, actually, this is your opt-out plugin. Click your plugin. So I clicked my plugin, all happy that I was about to opt out, and then I say, well, actually, technically, you're not really opting out, because if you delete your cookies, this is only for your browser. So if you change device, or if you change browser, and if you delete your cookies, you're technically not out of our services. And you're thinking, why is this? This is actually happening, and we're constantly being coerced into providing our personal information, and at the moment we feel that we can't do much. And this is what's happening in the families. They feel that they can't, parents feel that they can't do much. So, but why does this matter? The question is, why is this mattering? Like, why is this important? Why do we have to talk about this? Well, and many times when I talk to parents, they come to me and they say, well, you know what, I really don't mind if I'm targeted with some ads about, I don't know, diapers or so on. Why would this worry me? And I say, well, it matters. And it matters because our data traces, which as we've seen at GOP, can be terribly inaccurate, and are being collected, and they're being used to profile us and label us in particular ways. This is evident if we look at the role of data brokers. In 2014, the Obama administration launched an inquiry on big data, and the Federal Trade Commission published a report on data brokers. And the report was really interesting because it kind of shown how data brokers are collecting a lot of data from individuals' life, but also how they operate largely in a non-transparent way and in a non-accountable way. And I'm quoting from the Federal Trade Commission report. Two quotes, I've only added one here, but data brokers collect data from commercial, government, and other publicly available sources. Data collected could include bankruptcy information, voting registration, consumer purchase data, web browsing activities, warranty registration, and other details of consumers' everyday interactions. Data brokers do not obtain this data directly from consumers. and consumers are largely unaware that data brokers are collecting and using their information. And the report identified around 15 companies that work as data brokers. And they say, while each data broker source may provide only a few data elements about a consumer's activities, data brokers can put all of these elements together. So as you see, it's like they're actually collecting a lot of personal information, offline and online personal information. They keep on selling it and buying it from each other to make sense of who you are, right? And the problem is, and the report shows it, is that if you're labeled under a specific category, you are going to, well, you're going to incur consequences. And their example is very simple of saying, you know, if you're classified as a biker enthusiast, a motorcycle dealership is going to offer you coupons. It's going to target advertising, that's what's happening, right? But an insurance company may infer that you will engage in risky behavior. That's as simple as that. Again, they say if the data brokers categorize you as a diabetes interest, the manufacturer of sugar-free products could use that to target you, but again, the insurance could classify you as a consumer who's a higher risk, right? And again, if you think about the human practices, imagine that you have an hypochondriac friend and you are having dinner, and your hypochondriac friend tells you, I think I have diabetes too. And you are at dinner, you're chatting, and you're thinking, I don't think that's diabetes too, and you look at the symptoms. It is as easy as that. That is a data trace that is sold and bought and so on. But what is interesting about the Federal Trade Commission report is the fact that individuals in the Federal Trade Commission report are identified as consumers. But my question is, if the data that they gather of us is about our own voting right, registrations, if it is the data about our own religion, our own politics, our own ethnicity, then we're not only simply talking about consumers and consumer rights, we're talking about citizens and citizens' rights. And it is for this reason that when I work on the Child Data Citizen project, what I want to do is to show how data traces are intrinsically connected to new understandings of digital citizenship. Now, many of you might have been working on the concept of digital citizenship, which is quite popular in education, in the education field. Digital citizenship has also, and also in the studies of social movement and civic engagement, digital citizenship has always been understood as a way to participate to society through digital technologies, right? And in education, the mission of those working on digital citizenship is really outstanding, because it's this idea that there is a set of civic values that we can learn and teach and that we can use when people are using technologies, right? And this idea of like democratizing the internet, there's a lot there. In 2015, Iselin and Rupert published a book which drew on an older type of literature, and they actually looked at digital citizenship not only as participation but as performance. So the idea that actually through digital technologies we do not only participate to society, we construct our public selves. And it has a lot to do with self-representation, with identity, but also with the enactment of specific rights. And this idea of digital citizenship as performance of oneself, it's actually really, I find it very beautiful and fascinating, but also because it shows that there's a lot of people within, individuals within society who are generally not considered citizens. They're not yet citizens, like children or migrants, that actually use digital technologies to enact their public self, to be part of the common good, to feel like they participate to society, right? And in this, the work of Third and Collins, sorry, I keep on forgetting. The work of Third and Collins that they published in 2016, which looks at children as digital citizens, is particularly interesting in this regard, because it shows how children use technologies to participate in society. Now, although all this understanding of digital citizenship as performance and as participation is actually really interesting, what's happening in the last couple of years is that it's becoming clear that we need to rephrase and we need to rethink what we mean for digital citizenship. Because what happens when data traces talk for and about us? What happens when they build narratives for us? They build our performance, our public performance, right? And this is the question at heart of current work. I work a lot with also the Data Justice Lab in Cardiff. They do amazing stuff. But it's this idea that we actually have to start thinking about the datafication of citizens. In fact, as Heinz and Al have argued, at an historical time where both state agency and companies surveil every aspect of citizens' life, we are not just digital citizens because of our actions, but also because we increasingly live and operate in a datafied environment, in which everything we do lives a data trace. So, and my work on children's data traces aims to precisely show this, that children are not only digital citizens because they participate to society through their technological use, they are datafied citizens because they are coerced into digitally participating to society through their data traces, okay? So, and I'm about to conclude. So now my research goal is to highlight this relationship between data traces and citizenship. When we collect data of children, when we sign off terms and conditions, or agree to use specific services and platforms, we are not making a step towards their profiling as consumer subjects. We are also making a step towards their profiling as citizen subjects. And it is precisely by looking at what is happening in the industry and by understanding how data is bought, sold and profiled that we need to start to question the role of children's data traces. What we know for sure now is, one, that children's data traces are extraordinarily inaccurate. They come from, if you look at the datafication of everyday life, it's messy, contradictory, like I've seen. What we also know is that these traces are being collected, sold and used in many times for predictive analytics and in ways that escape our control. The third thing that we know is that, as Crawford and Schultz have argued, predictive analytics can have an impact on everyday life and can actually have profound harms for an individual's life. So, what can we do? I know this is a bit, I always talk about this and then people get depressed, but yeah, but there's things that we can do. What can we do? What is scaring me at the moment as I work with families is that once I find that many are actually negotiating with digital surveillance or digital privacy, and they are there, you know, they're active, I also find that they have very few they don't have awareness of the issues, of other issues such as data broking or digital profiling. I also find that they don't know much about technological developments, so not many know about changes in facial recognition, and only recently they're bringing it up because Facebook brought it up. I don't know if Facebook is targeting you now saying, we're changing our facial recognition, did you receive that message? Yeah. So they know it for that, but they don't know anything about, for instance, genetic mapping and genetic discrimination, and they just kind of submit their DNA details to websites. They know very, very little about predictive policing. And so I find myself coming to a conclusion of this talk in a full circle. What we need now, I think, is knowledge. We need to study, we need to become experts, we need to understand what is happening to our data traces. And we need to disseminate our findings as much as we can, not simply to raise awareness and then to leave people like Anna and Jay feeling that they can't do much about it. Yeah, they raise awareness, and then what are they going to do? What we need to do is to disseminate our knowledge and start asking questions as institutions, as organizations, and as a collective entity, and shift current debates that focus on individuals and individuals' privacy by turning the lights towards freedom of expression, self-representation, and data justice. Thank you.
Press the bottom.
Press the button.
Hold it down. Couple seconds.
Yes.
Let's go. And it's digital. Okay. We have a few minutes. We're close to the bottom of the hour here, but I want to take 10 or 15 minutes for any questions, get some conversation started, because a lot of what Veronica has to say may be very familiar to some of us, but not at all familiar to others. And this is part of the project of becoming more aware and trying to figure out what to do next. So I have this microphone. I'm going to pass it around. If you have a question, please ask using this so that we can get it recorded. Questions? Yes? And identify yourself.
Yeah, I'm Peter Pollack from the Information Studies program here. Yeah, thanks a lot for these examples, especially thinking about childhood is like extremely like pertinent. I don't think enough people are thinking about it, so it's really interesting. So thinking about like awareness of these issues, it seems like one of the prevailing ways of thinking about this is that there's kind of no way to be able to critique these systems because they're very opaque, for example. But we do have some examples of people kind of running into obstacles that show them ways that they might be critical of these technologies. Like in your experience working with these people, are there some ways that you identify that people kind of come to their own criticisms about this technology that isn't like introduced from the outside?
Yeah, so I leave this for Alex. I can take it out. Okay. So it has to go at all. I'm finding that people are increasingly becoming more and more aware, and parents like to talk about it because it's something that they are not sure what's happening yet. So they definitely and then when they start they're not sure what's happening yet, but they're self-censoring. They're a bit of a Foucauldian thing in which they're starting to self-censor. Like for instance, I was working with a family, and she was telling me that her little boy, who was 6 years old, who's really politically engaged, cried after the latest presidential election. They come from a minority group and they felt really threatened by the latest, so he was really upset. And she was so proud of him because she thought, you know, you're politically engaged, you're there, and that she made a video because it's like well, the boy was crying, she was like, and then she thought about posting it, and she's like, no, I'm not gonna post this. I mean, this might be there for years and years to come, and so I'm not gonna do it. So I think that at the moment what's really happening is that people are self-censoring a lot. They're asking questions, but I also feel that they're being left alone. So if you look at there was an article last week on CNN. It was like, how do you protect your online, the online identity of your children? And it was actually really interesting because it talked about what you could do as a parent. And I was shocked because it was like, for instance, it was a long part on education and saying, you have to go to your school and ask your school what softwares they use and what data policies they have, and you have to campaign with the school. And I was reading it, I was like, really? Is it the parent that has to go to the school and ask these questions? Yes, it could come from below, but it's also the schools that should start asking these questions. You see what I mean? So I think we are just starting to work on this. Wait, the road is really long, yeah. Any other questions?
Other hands up? Any questions?
No questions? Oh, yeah. Don't worry. Starting to go.
Thank you. Great talk, thank you very much. Jonathan Ferner from Information Studies. Last two words of your talk were data justice.
Yeah.
What would that be like?
Oh, can I get the microphone? The data justice, it's actually something that is the Data Justice Lab in Cardiff has been set up. And data justice is about recognizing that algorithms are not always accurate. That there is bias, that there is, which could be racial bias, it could be social bias, because ultimately technologies are created by humans, and humans have biases. that's not a secret, you know. And data justice is about starting to shed light on this stuff, to shed light on the fact that we don't know how we're being profiled. The profiling is gonna maybe, but it's likely that it's going to act increasingly more as a credit score. We have no knowledge of how it's happening and how it's impacting on our life. And so data justice is about transparency, it's about shedding light on the fact that the way in which we're being profiled maybe is not that accurate, that maybe it's biased. This is what it is.
Thanks for a good talk. I'm Lucas Cohen from SSE. So I want to raise a question. You started by mentioning the crisis of 2008, right? And this growing mistrust, et cetera, and expertise. You also mentioned that like two traits that characterize these data brokers were non-transparency and non-accountability. So how do we come to terms with the fact that like the largest sales argument of the largest tech companies is exactly transparency and accountability? It's exactly building on making the child completely transparent in terms of like learning trajectories, outcomes, so the parent can constantly monitor their development, et cetera, because that seems to be like a paradox built into this whole system.
Okay. I think that at the heart of that is what we understand for transparency, okay? Because transparency could be a really problematic and really contradictory term, right? It depends on how you apply it, right? So when you say that if we collect data from scratch, from the moment in which one is born, then it's transparent. I'm quite doubtful, because what I'm worried about is the fact that data can lead to many different interpretations, right? So, say for instance, this I can, like if I have to like go through applications, student applications for my work, right? I go through a student application and maybe I get someone who has a personal statement, who's an amazing personal statement, amazing CV, amazing stuff like that you can see, and then you have like very, very weak marks, okay? That's the moment in which I have data and I could make an informed decision on the basis of that data, but I need context. So usually what happens is that I invite someone in for an interview and I say, so what happened in 2014? And maybe they tell me, you know, my parent passed away, something, which is something that happened throughout my, and then you kind of contextualize and you make your informed decision, right? So when we talk about transparency and the transparency of data, it's not transparency of what data is out there, is what processes, transparency of what processes lead us to make specific decisions. So that's what I'm talking about. And I don't think, and I think that in the business world, the term transparency is being used many times not as I intended. Not saying that it's good or bad, just that not what I mean. Yeah. Any others?
Thank you. Ellen Perlstein from Information Studies. Thanks for that great talk. So I'm just dying to know more about Barbie Hello or Hello Barbie. I don't know anything about it.
Well, Hello Barbie. Actually, Hello Barbie is quite interesting. It was created by the guy from Pixar. Like, so at a certain point he had his child, and his child was playing with a teddy bear, and the teddy bear said, "Oh, it would be good if my teddy bear could talk back." Come on, how many of us had that feeling when we were little? And he thought, actually, this is so he got in a partnership with Mattel, and they decided to design Hello Barbie. Okay. And Hello Barbie is basically an artificial intelligence, quite basic artificial intelligence, but it can talk back, it records everything, all conversations that go into a cloud, and it can talk back to the child. And there's many different types of artificial intelligence toys that have emerged since. This is kind of 2014, 2000. Now, Hello Barbie didn't have a really good life. It still doesn't have a really good life. Because in 2015, I think around Christmas time, there was a massive breach into Hello Barbie, and there was like the idea that actually it was a hacker who had children, and they hacked into the Barbie and said, look, I mean, I can talk directly to the child, I can tell where the child lives, this is something really bad, right? And so there was something there about security, but at the same time in which Hello Barbie was created, another doll was created, which is called the Mykaila. Have you heard about Mykaila? And actually has been banned by the German government as a threat to national security, and they asked all parents who bought My Pala to destroy the doll. Like, I mean, so we're talking about like almost, it seems like science fiction, but we are actually there. But for my research, at a certain point, because I kept on struggling, because it's very difficult to do ethnographic work with families, because you can't be always at their house. I mean, it's just like, it's almost impossible, right? So I kept on struggling, thinking, oh, my job is not ethnographic enough, so I kept on thinking, how can I make it more ethnographic? So I bought myself an Hello Barbie, because I decided that I wanted to experiment with my Barbie. So, so my Barbie arrives home, and I still feel the feeling, and I still see it with this color flashing, and I'm looking at it, and I'm trying to set it up, and I wanted to try to set it up in a way that was not directly linked either to my Wi-Fi, so that there was no risk for my children, or that wasn't linked to my own phone. And it's still in the closet. I haven't managed to set it up, and I haven't managed to find a way to do it so that my children and my family would be protected, but I could actually talk to the Barbie, which I'm dying to. But like, I'm trying to figure out how I can talk to the Barbie. But this is the story of Barbie, and it's very interesting. There's a lot of artificial intelligence toys that are emerging in that. So.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Gann with the Information Studies Department. So I guess I'm kind of curious about the deification of children, what you think about it in terms of tools made primarily for adults. I'm looking at thinking about maybe the Alexa. They're saying that you really can't use it unless you're like over 13 years old, that kind of thing, all the terms and conditions where you can't use it unless you're over 13. But you have children using it constantly in the families. You have this data collection, but like the companies are kind of taking their own. So we wanted to leave that data if we say that your children's using it, but like they're all using it. So I'm kind of just curious about that differentiation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's definitely something there in the law that is still not quite right. Because like when I was working on the pregnancy apps, and I was like analyzing all the data policies, mind you that like for instance, pregnancy apps, you have the extraordinary intimate biometric information of an individual in the making life, right? So you have kids, you have what his or her mother ate, you have a lot of issues that could be used against him, especially after the research about what you know, alcohol use or cigarette use or things like that. So there's a lot of information. But it's funny because when you look at the privacy policy, it says we do not use willingly we do not use data of children that who were not 13 yet. And you're thinking, that's not true. You do. I mean, you have a pregnancy app, and you know that this data is that. And the same thing happens with a lot of home apps. Now Amazon has launched Echo for Kids, which is literally targeted at kids. Part of the marketing idea is to make it also educational. So now Echo for Kids is telling kids that they have to ask please when they ask questions. And there's a lot, and again, imagine that, I mean, if one had the time, imagine starting to do a project on the human values in the family, like, you know, like the Hello Barbie, for instance, like, that randomly talks to the child. So she would tell you like things, oh, so my friend at school today was treating me badly, and then you're thinking, this is a doll who's trying to give some sort of ethic to my child as if she was a babysitter, you know. And Echo Kids, we are there. It's also about parental control, so that they can't access pornography or so on. But it's definitely a tool that is marketed to the kids. And again, I haven't read their data privacy yet, but I'm interested to do it as soon as I can get my hands on it. So.
Let's have one more so that we can get on to...
Oh, I have...
Are we first?
I'll take it.
I'll pass it over.
Is there another question?
So my question is, you know, you keep talking about, you know, the possible problems that emerge from sort of profiling of these kind of future adults. I'm wondering if you have any historic or contemporary examples of how data collection around children have actually been used for profiling. And what are the examples of that? Are there examples of where it works, right? Where the profiling is actually useful, right? Because I feel like on the edges of where it's useful, that's where you're going to find the problems. So.
Yeah, the truth is, I have to tell you the truth, and this is something that I'm working on, and it's a question that I keep on asking myself, is it, how do I know that the children's data is being profiled? Well, I know for sure because I am being profiled on the basis of my child's age. So they already know how old my daughter is. I also know for sure that there are increasingly more court issues about adult data that is actually being profiled and how it's impacting in everyday life. I don't know if you follow the Spokeo case. Does anybody, do you know what the Spokeo case? Because Spokeo is this company that gathers what's public data and profiles people. And so if you're actually an employer, you just use Spokeo to make sure that the person that you want to employ is someone that you can trust and so on. And anyone could use Spokeo services. But a guy is suing Spokeo at the moment because basically they profiled him wrongly. And they profiled him as a wealthy middle-aged man. And he is not wealthy at all. And what he's saying in court is that actually for the last 5 years he couldn't find a job. And many times this thing about the Spokeo profiler was impacting on his job search. So at the moment we have, kind of almost moral panics, stories, and starting to have like the first court orders of this stuff. We know more or less that children's data is being profiled. Like there was the case recently about how Android illegally tracks children and targets advertising to them, and there was like it was in the news and things like that. But again, we still don't know for sure, right? And if we know whether profiling is good or bad, I don't think the question is whether it's good or bad. I think the question is, if it's happening, we have to know it. And if it's happening, we have to know it, and we have to know the terms in which it's happening. Do you see what I mean? So maybe it could be good, but like what the data brokers report is saying, it could be good in the sense that you could be offered better products, or it could be used in different situations, but it could also be bad because people could use it against you. And there is a good example of this is, it's taken from the literature. I know this is completely random, you're going to say, but there's this book which is called The Unbearable Lightness of Being, and that is about the Prague Revolution, against the Russians. And there was, and it's really beautiful because it's a novel about, and she goes onto the streets to start documenting what was happening on the streets and how people were being killed and how people were being detained and so on. And she takes a lot of photographs. And her same photographs then are used by the secret services to imprison the people on the street. So the question really is not whether, I can't see a good or a bad way. I don't think that's the way in which we have to argue a case. I think we just have to ask for better transparency, but transparency in the way in which we are being profiled. See what I mean?
Thank you, Veronica. Now we have afternoon sessions. We have in the Hacienda room a new batch of posters that are going up. I guess some people are already putting them up in there, so that's happening. We also have 5 more participatory sessions this afternoon, 3 in here, 2 in another room across the way. So